Before Esau even took his first breath, his life had already been marked by a prophecy that would alter the course of everything. His mother, Rebekah, struggled through a difficult pregnancy, sensing an unusual war happening inside her womb. Desperate and in pain, she turned to God for answers. The response she received was not one of comfort but of divine foresight. 2 nations are in your womb, and 2 peoples from within you will be separated. 1 people will be stronger than the other, and the older will serve the younger. Genesis 25:23. These words weren't just about 2 brothers. They were about destiny, legacy, and God's mysterious plan. From that very moment, Esau, though the firstborn, was destined to serve his younger brother Jacob. This prophecy hung like a shadow over Esau's life, a fate he didn't choose, one that would define him before he had a chance to prove himself. It's hard not to feel for Esau, to wonder what it must be like to be born already placed in second place. What makes this even more striking is how Esau entered the world. He came out first, covered in red hair like a wild cloak, strong and fierce like a natural-born warrior. His very presence screamed leadership, strength, and the birthright of a patriarch. And yet, right behind him came Jacob, grasping Esau's heel as if refusing to let him go without a fight. That small act at birth, the younger brother holding tightly onto the elder's foot, was symbolic of everything to come. Jacob was quiet, calculated, and favored by Rebekah. Esau, on the other hand, was adored by Isaac, the father who valued boldness and strength. Still, none of this changed what had already been spoken by God. No matter how much Esau might have been the kind of man the world respected, rugged, passionate, full of energy, he was already on a path where the greater blessing would pass him by. And not because he had done anything wrong. Simply because God's plan had chosen otherwise. This challenges us to reflect on how faith sometimes asks us to accept things we cannot control. What makes Esau's story so heartbreaking is the tension between free will and divine purpose. He had every earthly quality to become the leader of a great nation, and yet he was cast in a role where he would always be one step behind. It raises questions that many of us still wrestle with today. Why would God choose one over the other before they had done anything? Why was the one who seemed so full of promise not the chosen one? These aren't easy questions, and the Bible doesn't always give us neat answers. But what it does show is that God's perspective is vastly different from ours. In choosing Jacob over Esau, God wasn't simply favoring one son. He was unfolding a plan that would stretch across generations, leading to the birth of a nation and ultimately to salvation through Christ. Still, that truth doesn't erase the weight of Esau's story. He represents the person who, despite strength and effort, finds himself walking a path he didn't ask for. And yet, even in that, there's a deeper invitation to trust that even the most painful twists in our story can be part of something greater. Esau's life took a devastating turn in a single moment, a moment that came not during battle or betrayal, but in the quiet hunger of an ordinary day. After spending long hours hunting in the dry and unforgiving fields, he returned to his tent exhausted, his body aching and his stomach empty. The smell of lentil stew simmering from Jacob's pot hit him with an almost primal intensity. Driven by hunger and not thinking clearly, Esau begged his younger brother for food. "Quick, let me have some of that red stew, I'm starving," he said, as if nothing else mattered. In that vulnerable state, Jacob saw his chance. He asked Esau to sell him his birthright in exchange for the meal. What followed was not a calculated negotiation, but a tragic surrender. "I am about to die," Esau replied. "What good is the birthright to me?" And just like that, with no ceremony, no second thoughts, Esau gave up the sacred inheritance, that had been his since birth. It's easy to judge Esau for this decision. How could anyone give up something so precious for a bowl of stew? But if we're honest, many of us have done something similar, trading long-term blessings for short-term comfort. In that moment, Esau wasn't thinking about the legacy of Abraham, the spiritual calling attached to his role, or the generations that would come after him. He was simply hungry, tired, and human. He despised his birthright not because he hated it, but because he failed to see its value when it mattered most. The Bible doesn't just say he gave it up, it says he despised it. That word hits hard. It means he treated something sacred as worthless simply because he couldn't see past the moment. And Jacob, though cunning, simply took what Esau had handed him. This wasn't just a story of deception, it was a story of how a man's weakness can undo his future and how a single impulse can change the course of a destiny. This turning point in Esau's life wasn't just about food, it was about vision. Esau lived for the now, for the physical, for what he could feel and touch. Jacob, for all his flaws, saw beyond the stew. He saw the birthright as a key to something far greater than land or cattle. It was a door into God's plan. Esau, in contrast, was a man of action, not reflection. And in that brief, tragic instant, he let his hunger speak louder than his calling. This is what makes his story so painful and relatable. It's not just about losing a blessing, it's about how easily we can throw away what matters most when we're too focused on what feels urgent. Esau reminds us that our greatest battles are often not with others, but within ourselves. The battle between what we want now and what we were truly made for. And once that moment passes, it can never be undone. Jacob had always lived in the shadow of his brother Esau. While Esau roamed the fields, hunted wild animals, and impressed their father Isaac with his rugged strength, Jacob stayed close to the tents, quietly listening to stories of faith, legacy, and the promises God had made to their ancestor Abraham. He wasn't the kind of son who drew attention with his power, but with his mind. He watched, listened, and waited. And most of all, he believed. His mother, Rebekah, saw in Jacob a gentleness and devotion that convinced her he was the true heir to God's covenant. From the beginning, she favored him, not just out of love, but out of a deep conviction that Jacob was the one chosen by God. When the time came and Isaac was old and nearly blind, preparing to give his final blessing to Esau, Rebekah acted swiftly. She couldn't let her husband's affection for Esau undo what she believed was God's plan. And so, she set a scheme in motion that would forever change their family. Jacob hesitated. He wasn't naive. He knew the risk. He told his mother, "My brother Esau is a hairy man, and I'm a man with smooth skin. What if my father touches me?" The fear in his voice was real, not just of being caught, but of being cursed. But Rebekah, resolute and unwavering, took full responsibility. "Let the curse fall on me, my son," she said. She dressed Jacob in Esau's clothes, covered his hands and neck with goatskins, and prepared Isaac's favorite meal. The smell, the feel, the taste, it all had to be perfect. When Jacob stepped into his father's tent, pretending to be Esau, he was trembling inside. And yet, he followed through. "Who are you, my son?" Isaac asked. "I am Esau, your firstborn," Jacob replied. His voice quivered, but he held steady. Isaac, suspicious, reached out and touched a goat hair on Jacob's hands. "The voice is the voice of Jacob," he said, "but the hands are the hands of Esau." Still, the deception worked. Isaac, convinced by the smell of the clothes and the feel of the skin, bestowed upon Jacob the blessing meant for Esau, a blessing rooted in divine promises, riches, leadership, and destiny. The moment Isaac finished blessing Jacob, the consequences became inevitable. Not long after Jacob left the tent, Esau returned from hunting full of pride and expectation, only to learn the devastating truth: his blessing had been taken. His cries echoed through the tent, raw and heartbreaking. "Bless me too, my father," he begged. But Isaac could not undo what had been done. In that instant, a family was torn apart. Jacob had the blessing, but not without cost. He had to flee from the wrath of a brother who now hated him with a passion deep enough to kill. And yet, this painful chapter is what ultimately carried forward the lineage of Israel. Jacob's cunning wasn't born from greed, but from a desperate desire to receive what he believed was already his by divine right. His story is complex, part deception, part destiny, and fully human. We may struggle with his actions, but we also recognize the tension between doing what's right and doing what's necessary to fulfill a calling. Jacob didn't steal the blessing as much as he claimed the role that had been silently promised from the start. Esau's cries filled the tent like thunder, raw and unfiltered. The moment he realized Jacob had taken his blessing, it was as if the ground gave way beneath him. "Bless me too, my father," he sobbed, his voice shaking with heartbreak. But it was too late. Isaac, though full of sorrow, could not take back what had been given. And what remained for Esau wasn't a promise of abundance, but a painful prophecy that he would live by the sword, that he would serve his brother. Esau, the strong one, the firstborn, the beloved hunter, had been undone not by force but by deception. And something in him broke that day. Not just his pride, but his sense of belonging. His tears weren't just grief. They were the birth of something darker. Beneath the pain brewed a burning rage, and out of that rage came a vow. "When the days of mourning for my father are near, then I will kill my brother Jacob." It wasn't a threat spoken in haste, it was a promise that wrapped itself around his heart like fire. Rebekah, once again sensing danger, moved quickly. She overheard Esau's vow and knew Jacob's life was now at risk. She warned her younger son and urged him to flee to her brother Laban, far away from Esau's fury. And so, just as Jacob was receiving his long-awaited blessing, he also had to run for his life, leaving behind the land, the tents, and the family he had tried so hard to claim. Meanwhile, Esau stayed, but he was no longer the same. Something had hardened inside him. In an effort to reclaim his place, or perhaps to wound his parents in return, Esau made a decision that cut deep. He married 2 Hittite women who did not share the faith or customs of Isaac and Rebekah. It wasn't just about love. It was rebellion cloaked in tradition. These marriages brought grief to his parents, especially Rebekah, who had already risked everything for Jacob's sake. Esau's choices in the years that followed his marriages, his silence, his distance reflected a man trying to find his way back from a place of betrayal, but never quite making it. Yet, beneath the fury and pride, Esau's heart still carried the weight of loss. He later tried to amend his path by marrying a daughter of Ishmael, perhaps as an attempt to honor his family's legacy or reconnect with his roots. But the wound ran too deep to be healed with another marriage. He would eventually leave Canaan altogether, choosing instead to settle in the land of Seir, where he would build a new life, separate from Jacob, separate from the inheritance he had lost. His descendants would become the nation of Edom, a powerful and fierce people, often at odds with the descendants of Jacob, just as the prophecy had said. But even as Esau rose to power in his own right, the shadow of what had happened in that tent, his father's blessing, his brother's deception, never truly left him. His story is one of strength, stained by sorrow, of rage born from rejection, and perhaps most of all, of a man who lost everything he thought was his, not in war, But in a moment of silence, he wasn't there to stop. Years passed and the pain between the brothers settled into silence. Jacob had fled with the blessing, building a life far from the shadow of Esau's fury. Meanwhile, Esau stayed behind and carried the weight of betrayal in his chest like a stone that wouldn't move. He rose in strength, built his family, and became a powerful leader. But some wounds can't be covered with achievements. Then one day Jacob returned. Word spread that he was coming home not alone, but with wives, children, servants, and livestock. It wasn't just a homecoming, it was a reckoning. Esau heard and gathered 400 men. For a moment, the world held its breath. Was this the moment Esau had long promised, the day he would finally avenge the betrayal? But when the two brothers came face to face, something unimaginable happened. Esau didn't draw his sword. He didn't shout or accuse or strike. Instead, he ran to Jacob, arms wide open, and embraced him. He kissed his brother, and together they wept. All the years of silence, all the grief and bitterness and unresolved pain melted in that one moment of reconciliation. Jacob, trembling, bowed low and offered gifts, calling himself Esau's servant. But Esau shook his head. "I already have plenty, my brother," he said. "Keep what you have for yourself." He wasn't the same man who had once sworn vengeance in the bitterness of loss. Something had changed in Esau. He had made peace with what happened, not by pretending it didn't hurt, but by choosing to let go of the weight it carried. His embrace wasn't weakness. It was strength, perhaps the greatest strength he had ever shown. That moment in the field between Esau and Jacob stands as one of the most powerful scenes of forgiveness in the Bible. Esau had every reason to stay angry, every justification to hold a grudge, and yet he chose healing. Not because he forgot the past, but because he had outgrown it. He found a different kind of blessing, not the one Isaac gave with trembling hands, but the kind that comes when a heart finally breathes freely again. That embrace between two broken brothers teaches us more than 1,000 sermons. It shows us that even the deepest wounds can heal. It reminds us that grace isn't always handed down from heaven. Sometimes it's offered from one human soul to another, in a tearful hug, in a soft smile, in the words, "I have enough." Esau's act of forgiveness didn't just restore a relationship, it gave meaning to his story. He may have lost the birthright, but he found something far greater: peace. And in that, he became not a man who was defeated, but one who had overcome. Esau's story didn't end in bitterness or defeat. Though he had lost the birthright and the blessing, and though history often remembers him as the one who was passed over, his life tells a far more powerful tale. Esau went on to build a legacy of his own, leading his family to the land of Seir, where he became the father of a great nation, Edom. He didn't receive the covenant of Abraham, but he wasn't forsaken by God either. His descendants became rulers and warriors, a people known for their strength and resilience. This shows us something beautiful. Even if we're not chosen for one path, it doesn't mean God has no purpose for us. Esau's life, though marked by loss, was also full of growth. He chose not to be defined by what he lost, but by what he built after. That takes courage, not the kind that hunts in the wild, but the kind that rebuilds from within. What truly sets Esau apart is how he responded to disappointment, not with revenge in the end, but with maturity, with perspective. He could have let his pain shape him into a bitter man. Instead, he let time, distance, and God's grace soften his heart. He forgave his brother. He refused to cling to old wounds. And when Jacob offered him gifts, Esau said something that resonates through generations: "I already have plenty." Those words weren't just about material wealth, they were about peace. He had found peace in his place, in his portion, in his story. That is a different kind of blessing, one that can't be stolen or given, but only discovered. Esau's legacy is not only the land he claimed or the people he fathered, but the choice he made to live with dignity after defeat. And maybe, just maybe, that's the kind of strength God honors most, the strength to let go. We don't all get the ending we dream of. Sometimes we lose what we thought was ours. Sometimes we're deceived, overlooked, or broken by people we love. But Esau's story reminds us that even then, we're not without purpose. Maybe you've lost something, a job, a relationship, an opportunity you worked hard for, and you've asked yourself, what now? Esau shows us that the what now can still be meaningful, even beautiful. He teaches us that we can rise from failure, forgive what feels unforgivable, and move forward with a heart that's free. His embrace of Jacob wasn't just a personal moment. It was a declaration that grace is stronger than revenge. And in today's world, where so many are quick to cut off, cancel, or carry grudges, that message is more needed than ever. We may not all be Jacobs, chosen and blessed, but we can all be like Esau, strong enough to forgive, wise enough to move on, and brave enough to build something new out of what's been broken.